My daughter Vanessa laughed at my cooking for years. But the night she mocked my late husband's favorite beef stew in front of everyone, something inside me finally broke. She wonders why Dad had cholesterol problems, she joked, clinking her wine glass, while her wealthy friends laughed at my table. The room went silent. My son stared at his plate. My youngest daughter looked ready to cry. And I just stood there in my old kitchen, holding the serving spoon so tightly, my hand hurt. That night, after 40 years of Sunday family dinners, I quietly decided Vanessa would never be invited back again. She thought she was insulting food. She had no idea she was destroying the last thing holding this family together. If stories about family betrayal, self-respect, and earned healing mean something to you, please subscribe to Rebecca's Justice Stories. Like this video. And tell me in the comments, would you keep inviting a relative who publicly humiliates you in your own home? My name is Rebecca Clark. I was 68 years old, a widow, and the keeper of a modest brick home in Willow Creek, Ohio. The house was not impressive by modern standards. The cabinets were oak, not glossy white. The dining room chandelier had belonged to my mother. The living room carpet had survived 3 children, 2 grandchildren, a leaky window, and 1 beagle who had never understood the difference between a rug in the backyard. But it was warm. It was lived in. And for more than 4 decades, it had been the place where my family came when they wanted to feel like they belonged. I had worked at the Willow Creek Public Library for most of my adult life. I knew the rhythm of quiet rooms, returned books, patient questions, and people who needed help without wanting to ask for it. My husband William had spent 37 years working maintenance at the county hospital. Neither of us made much money, but we made a life. William was the kind of man who could repair a broken drawer with a screwdriver, a paper clip, and an expression of complete confidence. He laughed loudly at his own jokes. He sang off key while washing dishes. And every Sunday, without fail, he stood in the kitchen doorway and asked me the same question. "What are you making, Beck?" He asked it like he had just walked into the finest restaurant in the country. Sometimes it was roast chicken, sometimes baked pork chops, macaroni and cheese, or collard greens with cornbread. In the colder months, I made beef stew, thick with potatoes, carrots, onions, and the slow-cooked flavor William loved more than any meal in the world. Now that, he used to say after the first spoonful, could bring a man back from the dead. When William passed away 8 years ago, I stopped making that stew for almost a year. I could not stand the smell of it filling the house without him sitting at the table. But grief does not always let you keep avoiding the things you love. Eventually, I made it again. I cried while I stirred the pot. Then I ate 1 bowl by myself, at the kitchen counter, and felt, for the first time in months, as if William had left behind something more than absence. Sunday dinner became my way of holding the family together after that. My son Marcus came most weeks with his wife, Denise, and their 2 boys. He was 43, worked for an HVAC company, and had inherited William's habit of fixing things before anyone asked. Marcus never came empty-handed. If he was not carrying dessert, he was bringing a filter for my furnace, a new smoke detector battery, or some small household item he had noticed needed replacing. My youngest daughter, Tasha, was 36 and taught 2nd grade at the local elementary school. She had a gentle heart and the emotional strength of someone who could comfort a crying child, confront an angry parent, and still call me afterward to make sure I had eaten dinner. Then there was my oldest daughter, Vanessa. Vanessa had once been the child who stayed beside me in the kitchen longer than anyone else. When she was little, she climbed onto a chair in one of William's old t-shirts and stirred cake batter with a wooden spoon nearly as tall as she was. She loved helping me cook. At 9, She told me my peach cobbler was better than any dessert at a restaurant. At 12, she begged me to teach her how to make the stew, because she said she wanted to cook it for her own family one day. Back then, I believed that memory would always be ours. But Vanessa grew up wanting a life far from Willow Creek. She was bright, polished, and determined to never appear ordinary. She went to college in Chicago, found a job in corporate marketing, married a financial consultant named Ethan, and slowly built the kind of life that appeared perfect online. Their condo had floor-to-ceiling windows. Their vacations had ocean views. Their photographs showed rooftop dinners, designer clothes, and drinks held up against city lights. I was proud of her success. But success did not have to turn into shame. Over the years, Vanessa began treating every simple thing about home as if it were proof she had outgrown us. At first, the comments were small. "Mom, do you still use canned soup and casserole recipes? Those curtains have been there since I was a teenager. Do you know there are healthier ways to cook chicken now?" She would say it lightly, almost playfully, and I would smile. That was my mistake. I thought if I did not show hurt, the hurt would not grow. But Vanessa's little jokes did grow. She began making comments about the food before she tasted it. She teased the furniture. She criticized the size of my portions. She spoke about Willow Creek, the way people talk about a place they escaped from rather than the town that had raised them. One Sunday, I made mashed potatoes because my grandsons loved them. Vanessa took one bite, put down her fork, and said, "Mom, are these made with actual butter?" I looked at her. Yes. Ethan gave a soft laugh into his glass. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. "Well, that explains why Dad always had high cholesterol." The table went quiet. William had been dead for 6 years at that point. I felt something tighten in my chest, but I forced a laugh. "Your father enjoyed his food?" "That is one way to put it," Vanessa said. Marcus looked up from his plate. "Can we not talk about Dad like that?" Vanessa rolled her eyes. "I was joking." Tasha glanced at me. She knew I was hurt. She had always known when I was trying too hard to pretend. But I did what I always did. I changed the subject. I asked the boys about school. I offered everyone more potatoes. I smiled until my face ached. After dinner, Tasha stayed behind to dry dishes. "Mom," she said quietly, "why do you let Vanessa talk to you that way? She does not mean anything by it." Tasha stopped drying the plate in her hands. "Yes, she does." I looked away. She has a different lifestyle now. Her world is different. Her world being different does not give her permission to be cruel. I did not answer, because I knew she was right. The truth was, I had become afraid of upsetting Vanessa. I was afraid she would stop visiting completely. Afraid my grandsons would lose their aunt. Afraid that once Sunday dinner ended, there would be nothing left connecting all of us to each other. So I tolerated comments that should have been stopped long before they became a pattern. I adjusted recipes. I bought lower sodium broth, even when I did not like it. I started making a salad every Sunday because Vanessa had once called my meals a beige parade. I began worrying in grocery store aisles about whether she would approve of what I bought. One afternoon, I picked up a package of butter and heard her voice in my head. I set it back down. Then I stood there, in the refrigerated aisle, feeling ridiculous and sad. It was never really about butter. It was about how easy it had become for her opinion to invade every corner of my life. The first time Vanessa invited guests to one of my Sunday dinners, I thought it was a good sign. She said 2 coworkers from Chicago would be visiting nearby, and she wanted them to experience a real home-cooked meal. I spent all Saturday preparing. I polished the silverware. I made pot roast, honey-glazed carrots, warm biscuits, And apple pie. I used the tablecloth William and I had bought during our 25th anniversary trip to Tennessee. I wanted Vanessa to be proud. That was the part I hate admitting. Even after all the jokes, I still wanted her to look around the dining room and remember what love had built there. Her coworkers were kind when they arrived. A woman named Claire told me the house felt cozy. Before I could thank her, Vanessa laughed. "My mom refuses to change anything," she said. "It is basically a time capsule." Claire looked embarrassed. I told her, "Well, some things have lasted because they were made well." At dinner, one of the guests praised the pot roast. "This is wonderful, Mrs. Clark." Vanessa lifted her wine glass. "Everything tastes wonderful," she said. "You just need a medical team standing by afterward." A few people gave uneasy little laughs. Not because it was funny, because they did not know what else to do. Marcus set down his fork. "Vanessa? Enough." She looked genuinely offended. "What? I am complimenting her cooking?" "No. You are making Mom the punchline again." Vanessa turned toward me. "Mom knows I am joking, right?" Every face at the table shifted toward me. I had a chance then. I could have told the truth. Instead, I smiled weakly and said, "Let's just enjoy dinner." That answer saved the evening for everyone except me. When the guests left, I found crumbs on the tablecloth, dishes in the sink, and a silence in the house that felt heavier than usual. I folded the cloth carefully and put it away. Then I sat in William's chair. For the first time, I wondered whether I was protecting the family or only protecting Vanessa from the consequences of how she treated me. Thanksgiving arrived 6 weeks later. It had always been William's favorite holiday. Christmas came with gifts and noise, but Thanksgiving came with food, stories, football, and people gathering because they chose to be together. Every year, William would wake early, come into the kitchen, and steal pieces of turkey before it was ready. "Quality control," he would say. That year, I woke at 5:30 in the morning. The house was dark and still. I tied on my apron, turned on the kitchen light, and began cooking. There was a turkey in the oven, sweet potatoes cooling on the counter, cornbread, green beans, mashed potatoes, pecampie, and, because it was the first cold Thanksgiving week we had had in years, I made a large pot of William's beef stew. I did not make it for Vanessa. I made it because I missed my husband. I made it because some memories deserve to be honored without apology. Marcus arrived with Denise and the boys. Tasha came carrying 2 pies from a bakery near her school. The house filled with familiar sounds, children running down the hall, the television playing football, Marcus asking if I needed help, Tasha humming while she arranged the napkins. For a few hours, it felt like the old days. Then Vanessa arrived with Ethan and 2 friends from Chicago. She was wearing a cream-colored coat, expensive boots, and the expression she often wore when she walked into my house, a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Mom," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "These are Claire and Benjamin." Claire complimented the smell coming from the kitchen. Benjamin looked around the dining room and said, "This place has character." Vanessa laughed softly. "It is definitely original." Tasha's face tightened. I pretended not to notice. I kept cooking. I kept serving. I kept telling myself that one holiday did not have to become another battlefield. When everyone sat down, the table looked beautiful. Candles glowed against the old china. Steam rose from the dishes. For a brief moment, I could almost see William at the head of the table, smiling at the chaos. Then Vanessa looked over the food. "Wow," she said. "Mom made enough to feed 50 people. Marcus smiled. "That is called Thanksgiving." Vanessa poked at the mashed potatoes. I am scared to ask how much butter is in these. It is a holiday, I said gently. Ethan laughed. At Rebecca's house, calories are, apparently, a family tradition. I smiled, because I had trained myself to smile. But something inside me was already tired. Then Vanessa reached for the beef stew. She took one spoonful, set down her bowl, and looked at Claire and Benjamin. You know, she said, lifting her wine glass. This was Dad's favorite meal. My hand stopped around the serving spoon. Vanessa smiled. And people wonder why he had cholesterol problems. Benjamin laughed awkwardly. Claire looked down. Ethan smirked into his glass. The sound that followed was small, but it was enough. Enough to make the room go cold. Enough to make Tasha's eyes fill with tears. Enough to make Marcus stare at his plate, as if he could not bear to look at his sister. I stood beside the table, holding the spoon so tightly, my knuckles hurt. For years, I had excused Vanessa because she was my daughter. But at that table, surrounded by people who had watched her turn love into a joke, I finally saw what my silence had cost. And I knew that when the last guest left my house that night, Sunday dinner would never be the same again. No one spoke after Vanessa made that joke. Not Marcus. Not Tasha. Not even Ethan. The only sound in the room was the low murmur of the football game from the television in the living room and the faint clink of Vanessa's wine glass as she set it down. She looked around the table as though she had said something clever. What? She asked. I was just being honest. I looked at the stew. Steam curled above the bowl in front of her. The same stew William had asked for every winter. The same stew he ate when he came home tired from a long shift. The same stew he once called the closest thing to comfort a person could taste. Vanessa had not insulted a meal. She had used her father's memory to make herself look superior. Tasha pushed her chair back. That was cruel, she said. Vanessa gave a short laugh. Oh, please. Everybody is suddenly so sensitive. No, Marcus said quietly. You are just used to getting away with it. Vanessa turned toward him. Excuse me? You come here. Criticize Mom's house. Criticize her food. Criticize the town. And now you are making jokes about Dad at Thanksgiving. I said one thing. You say one thing every time, Tasha replied. And Mom spends the rest of the night pretending it did not hurt her. For years, I had protected Vanessa from moments exactly like that. I would interrupt. I would bring out dessert. I would say we should all calm down. But that night, I did not. I put the serving spoon down. Then I looked at my daughter. Vanessa, I said, you need to leave. Her face changed. At first, she looked confused. Then insulted. Are you serious? Yes. Because I made a joke? No, I said, because you have made me the joke for years. The room went silent again. Vanessa looked at Ethan as though he might rescue her. He shifted in his chair but said nothing. You are overreacting, she said. I may have waited too long to react. I told her, but I am reacting now. Her eyes narrowed. So you are throwing me out of Thanksgiving dinner in front of everyone? I am asking you to leave my home because you have repeatedly disrespected me in it. You cannot be serious. I am. For one long moment, she just stared at me. Then she laughed. But there was no warmth in it. Fine, she said. If you want to be dramatic, that is your choice. She stood so quickly that her chair scraped across the floor. Ethan got up behind her. Claire and Benjamin looked uncomfortable, murmuring apologies that they did not owe me. Vanessa grabbed her coat from the hall closet and walked toward the front door without looking back. But before she stepped outside, she turned around. You know what, Mom? This is why nobody can talk to you honestly. You take everything personally. I held the doorway open. No, I said. This is why you confuse cruelty with honesty. Then I closed the door behind her. My hand stayed on the lock for several seconds. I expected to feel triumphant. I did not. I felt hollow. The whole house had gone quiet. The candles still burned on the dining table. The food was still warm. But it no longer felt like Thanksgiving. It felt like the end of something I had spent years trying to save. Tasha came to stand beside me. Mom, she whispered. Are you okay? I looked toward the window. Vanessa's car backed out of the driveway, its red taillights disappearing down the street. I do not know yet, I told her. Marcus walked into the hallway with his hands in his pockets. You did the right thing. I threw my daughter out on Thanksgiving. You asked a grown woman to leave after she insulted you in your own house? That is still my daughter. Marcus nodded. I know. That is why it took you this long. The rest of the evening passed gently. Denise wrapped leftovers into containers. The boys watched a movie in the living room. Tasha helped me clear dishes from the table. No one rushed me. No one told me I had to forgive Vanessa immediately. No one asked me to pretend nothing had happened. That kind of quiet care was new to me. I had always believed love meant keeping everyone comfortable. But I was beginning to understand that the people who truly love you do not ask you to keep accepting pain so they can avoid discomfort. After everyone left, I washed the last dish by hand. It was William's favorite soup bowl. Heavy white stoneware, with a tiny chip along the rim. He refused to throw it away because he said it was still perfectly good. I dried it slowly and placed it back in the cabinet. Then I sat at the kitchen table and cried. Not because Vanessa was gone, because I had finally stopped waiting for her to become the daughter I remembered. The next morning, I woke to 7 missed calls. All from Vanessa. There were also messages. Mom, this is ridiculous. Ethan and I are embarrassed. You humiliated me in front of my friends. Call me back. The last message arrived shortly after 8. I do not know why you are acting like I attacked you. Dad would be ashamed of how you handled this. That one hurt. William had loved Vanessa fiercely. He had always seen the good in her, even when she was difficult. I knew she was using his name because she knew exactly where to aim. For years, that message would have made me call her immediately. I would have apologized for being too emotional. I would have explained why I was hurt until she sounded tired of listening. I would have found a way to make the peace, even if I had to give up a piece of myself to do it. Instead, I put my phone face down on the table. Then I made coffee. At 10 o'clock, Tasha called. I saw Vanessa's post, she said. What post? She put something on social media about how she was publicly attacked by family for suggesting healthier eating. I closed my eyes. Do not read it to me. I will not. But people are commenting. I do not care. You should not have to care, Tasha said. But I know it hurts. It did hurt. Not because strangers believed Vanessa's version of the story. Most of them did not know me. They did not know what had happened around my table for years. It hurt because my daughter had taken a private family wound and made it into a performance. By noon, Marcus called too. She is calling everyone, he said. She told Aunt Rochelle you threw her out because she would not eat your food. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She ate the stew. I know, he said. I was there. Marcus paused. Mom, please, do not let her bully you into apologizing. The word bully made me uncomfortable. I did not want to think of Vanessa that way. But perhaps that was the problem. I had been so afraid of making my daughter sound bad that I had never named what she was doing. That afternoon, I called Susan Hale. Susan had been a friend of mine and William's for years. We met through a church volunteer project when our children were young. She was not my lawyer. although she had been one for most of her career. She was simply someone who had always known how to ask the question people were trying to avoid. When I told her what happened, she listened without interrupting. Finally, she asked, "Rebecca, what do you want now?" The question surprised me. "I want my daughter to respect me." "You cannot force that." "I know." "So what can you control?" I looked around my kitchen. The same kitchen where I had cooked hundreds of meals. The same kitchen where I had spent years preparing food for someone who treated my effort like a joke. "My home," I said. "Yes?" Susan replied. "And who you invite into it." That conversation stayed with me. Over the next few days, Vanessa continued trying to reach me. She called. She texted. She sent an email that began with the words, "I am sorry you feel that way." I read only the first sentence. That was not an apology. It was a way of telling me the problem was my reaction, not her behavior. Then, 4 days after Thanksgiving, an envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was addressed in Vanessa's handwriting. For a moment, I thought it might be a real letter. Perhaps she had calmed down. Perhaps she had remembered what Thanksgiving was supposed to mean. But inside was not an apology. It was an invitation. Vanessa and Ethan were hosting a holiday charity gala in Chicago for Ethan's investment firm. The invitation was printed on thick cream paper with gold lettering. There was a photograph of a downtown ballroom and a note that said, "Formal attire required." At the bottom, Vanessa had written, "Mom, I want you to come. It would be good for us to show everyone we are fine." I stared at those words. Not, "I want to make this right." Not, "I am sorry for hurting you." Show everyone, we are fine. Vanessa did not want reconciliation. She wanted an audience. I did not respond. 2 days later, she called again. This time, I answered. "Mom," she said quickly. Finally. "Hello, Vanessa." She sounded irritated, as though I had inconvenienced her by having boundaries. "Did you get my invitation?" "I did." "So you are coming?" "No." There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "No?" "I mean I will not be attending." "Mom, it is a charity event. Ethan's firm is involved. Important people will be there. I hope it goes well." "You cannot be serious. This is a chance for us to move on." "Moving on requires honesty?" Vanessa exhaled loudly. "I said I was sorry." "No. You said you were sorry I felt hurt." "Because you were hurt by a joke?" "You made a joke about your father's death?" "I made a comment about his diet." "At my table? In front of strangers? After years of making me feel small?" Her silence lasted longer than usual. Then she said, "You really have been talking to Tasha too much." That sentence told me everything. Vanessa did not hear me. She heard influence. She heard manipulation. She heard anyone except the mother she had spent years dismissing. "I am not discussing Tasha," I said. "I am talking about you and me." "Fine. Then what do you want?" I closed my eyes. For years, I had wanted her to become kinder without being asked. I had wanted her to remember who she had been before. Status and appearances mattered more than people. But I could not make her become that person. "I want you to acknowledge what you did," I told her, without blaming me for being hurt, without calling it a joke, without making me sound unstable or dramatic. "So I have to grovel now?" "No. You have to be accountable." Her voice cooled. "You know what? Forget it. Do whatever you want." "I intend to." I hung up the phone. My hands shook afterward, but not from regret. From the unfamiliar feeling of standing up for myself without immediately running back to fix the damage. A week later, Marcus came by to replace a faulty outlet in my dining room. While he worked, He told me Vanessa had been calling him too. She wants everyone to tell you that you are being unreasonable. He said. What did you tell her? That you are allowed to decide who comes into your home. I looked toward the dining room table. The Thanksgiving tablecloth was still folded in the cabinet. I had not had the strength to use it again. She thinks I am breaking up the family, I said. Marcus stepped down from the small ladder. Mom? The family was not held together by you accepting disrespect. It was held together by you doing all the work. I did not answer right away, because I knew he was right. I had been the one cooking, inviting, calling, forgiving, smoothing over, and pretending. Vanessa had called it tradition. But a tradition that requires one person to be hurt over and over is not a tradition. It is a burden. That Sunday, for the first time in 40 years, I did not cook a full family dinner. I made a small pot of stew for myself. Tasha came over in jeans and a sweatshirt. Marcus arrived later with the boys. Denise brought cornbread. We ate in the kitchen instead of the dining room. There was no fancy tablecloth, no polished silverware, and no pressure to make everything perfect. The boys laughed too loudly. Tasha spilled tea. Marcus had to open a window because he burned the cornbread slightly. And somehow, it was the most peaceful dinner I had had in years. Near the end of the evening, Tasha looked at me. Are you going to invite Vanessa for Christmas? The question rested between us. I looked down at William's old soup bowl in my hands. Then I thought about the silence after Vanessa's joke. The messages. The social media post. The invitation that was only about appearances. The way she had refused every chance to tell the truth. No, I said. My voice was calm. Not angry. Not trembling. She is not welcome in this house until she understands that being my daughter does not give her permission to disrespect me. No one argued. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Outside, snow had begun falling over Willow Creek. Inside, the stew was warm, and for the first time since William died, I understood that keeping a family together did not mean keeping every door open. Sometimes, love requires you to close one until the person on the other side learns how to knock. Christmas came slowly that year. For most of my life, December had been a month of noise in my house. There were school concerts, wrapping paper, grocery lists, church programs, children underfoot, and William humming the wrong words to every song on the radio. He loved Christmas lights so much that Marcus used to joke our front porch could be seen from space. After William died, I kept the traditions alive because I thought that was what he would have wanted. I put the wreath on the front door. I hung stockings over the fireplace. I cooked too much food, and I kept setting a place for every person who had ever called my house home. But that year, I did things differently. I still decorated. I still placed William's old wooden angel on top of the tree. I still put out the handmade ornaments the children had made in elementary school. Vanessa's was a crooked red star, with glitter fading along the edges. Marcus had made a reindeer with one eye lower than the other. Tasha's tiny paper bell still had her name written in purple crayon. I held Vanessa's ornament in my hand for a long time. Then I hung it on the tree, not because she had earned forgiveness, because I did not need to erase the past to protect myself from the present. 2 weeks before Christmas, Vanessa s'envoie un message. Can we talk? I read it at the kitchen table, while snow drifted against the window. For an hour, I did not respond. Then I wrote back. You may come Sunday at 2 o'clock. Come alone. She replied almost immediately. Okay. On Sunday, I made coffee, but no meal. That was intentional. For years, I had softened every hard conversation with food. I had made pies, casserole, biscuits, and desserts, in the hope that comfort would solve what honesty had not. This time, I wanted no distraction. At 2 o'clock exactly, Vanessa knocked on the front door. Not rang the bell. Knocked. I noticed that before I opened it, she stood on the porch, in a plain black coat. No Ethan. No friends. No polished smile. Her hair was pulled back, and she looked tired in a way I had never seen before. "Hi. Mom," she said. "Come in." She stepped inside slowly, looking around the living room as though she expected it to have changed. It had not. The same photographs sat on the mantel. The same old sofa stood beneath the window. The same dining room table waited in the next room, polished but empty. Vanessa looked toward the tree. "You put up my old star." "Yes. I did not think you would. I put up all my children's ornaments." She nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I led her to the kitchen table. She sat across from me, wrapping both hands around the coffee mug I had placed in front of her. "I am sorry," she said. The words came quickly. Too quickly. I waited. Vanessa looked down. "I am sorry Thanksgiving got out of control." I said nothing. She took a breath. "I should not have made that comment about Dad." "No," I said. "You should not have." Her eyes lifted to mine. "I was drinking. Ethan's friends were there. I wanted to make them laugh." "And you chose me?" She swallowed. "Yes." I let the silence stretch. For once, I did not rescue her from it. Vanessa's voice became quieter. "I know I have been hard on you." "Hard on me is not the word I would use." She flinched. "What word would you use?" I looked at the woman across from me. My daughter. The little girl who had once stood beside me on a chair, stirring brownie batter with both hands. The teenager who slammed doors when she was angry. The adult who had learned to use a sharp laugh the way other people used a knife. "Humiliating," I said. "Dismissive. Cruel." Tears filled her eyes. I did not realize. "Yes, you did." She stopped. I leaned forward. "You knew when I stopped speaking at the table. You knew when Tasha looked upset. You knew when Marcus asked you to stop. You knew I laughed because I did not want to fight." Vanessa stared down at her hands. "I thought you did not care that much." "That is because I made the mistake of pretending I did not." She began to cry then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. She covered her face with one hand and tried to hold it in. But the tears came anyway. For a part of me, it would have been easy to let those tears erase everything. That is what mothers do sometimes. We see our children hurting, and our own pain becomes smaller because we want to make theirs stop. But I had learned something important. Someone can be sorry and still need to face what they did. So I waited until she looked at me again. "I am not asking you to stop loving me," she said. "I will always love you." "Then why does it feel like you are taking everything away?" "Because for the first time, I am not giving you access without respect." Vanessa looked toward the dining room. "Am I not invited for Christmas?" "No." Her face crumpled. "Mom." "I am not saying never. I am saying not now." I said I was sorry. "You apologized today. That matters. But an apology is the beginning of repair. It is not the repair itself." She wiped her eyes. "So what am I supposed to do?" "Learn how to speak to me without trying to make yourself feel bigger." Her expression tightened with hurt. But she did not argue. I continued. "You are welcome to call me. You are welcome to visit when we agree on it. But you will not come into this house and mock me, my husband, my food, my home, or the life your father and I gave you." "I understand. And if you do it again, you will leave." She nodded slowly. "I understand." That was the most honest conversation Vanessa and I had had in years. It did not solve everything. It did not restore trust. but it gave truth a place to stand. Before she left, she paused beside the Christmas tree. Her eyes rested on the crooked red star she had made as a child. "Dad used to tell everyone I made that," she said. "He was proud of you." I do not know why I became so embarrassed by where I came from. I looked at her. "Maybe because you thought being successful meant you had to look down on the people who loved you before you had anything?" Vanessa did not answer, but she nodded. Christmas dinner was smaller that year. Marcus, Denise, the boys, and Tasha came over in the afternoon. We ate roast chicken, dressing, sweet potatoes, green beans, and pecan pie. I did not make beef stew, not because it belonged to Vanessa's cruelty, but because I wanted to make it one day when I could cook it without remembering the silence that followed her joke. The house was loud again. The boys opened presents too quickly. Tasha cried when I gave her a framed photograph of William holding her as a baby. Marcus spent half an hour trying to assemble a toy without reading the instructions, which made Denise laugh so hard she had to sit down. I looked around the room and felt something settle inside me. This was still family. Not perfect family. Not the family I had imagined when all my children were young and sitting around that same dining room table, but real family. The kind that did not demand I disappear so everyone else could feel comfortable. After dinner, Tasha helped me wash dishes. "You did not make stew," she said gently. "No." "Will you make it again?" I looked toward William's old soup bowl in the cabinet. "Yes," I said. "When I am ready?" A month passed. Then another. Vanessa called every Sunday evening. At first, the calls were awkward. She asked about the weather. I asked about work. Sometimes there were long pauses that neither of us knew how to fill. But she did not insult me. She did not criticize the house. She did not turn every conversation into a comparison between her life and mine. One evening in February, she told me she had started seeing a therapist. I did not ask for details. I only said, "I hope you are honest there." "I am trying to be." Weeks later, Marcus told me Ethan had been unhappy that Vanessa apologized. "He said you were being too sensitive," Marcus said carefully. I felt sad for my daughter. Not because I wanted to blame Ethan for her choices. Vanessa had made those choices herself. But I could see how easily she had learned to think contempt was sophistication. "What did Vanessa say?" I asked. Marcus smiled faintly. "She told him you do not get to insult my mother in front of me anymore." I closed my eyes. For a moment, I could not speak. It was not a grand gesture. It did not undo years of hurt. But it was a beginning. The first time I invited Vanessa back for dinner was in early March. I chose a Sunday without a holiday. Without guests. Without any reason to perform being a happy family. Marcus and Tasha knew I had invited her. But I told them not to make a big deal of it. Vanessa arrived alone. She stood outside the front door, with a bouquet of tulips and a nervous expression. "I brought these for you," she said. "Thank you." "And I brought something else." She held out a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Note a text message. Not an email. A real letter. I read it later that night. After everyone had gone home, Vanessa wrote that she had spent years believing her childhood was something she had to distance herself from in order to become successful. She wrote that every joke about my house and my food had been a way to convince herself she was not still the little girl from Willow Creek who worried she would never belong in richer rooms. Then she wrote something that made me cry. "I kept acting like your love was something I could mock because I believed it would always be there no matter what I did. I was wrong. I am sorry. I used your kindness as proof that I could hurt you without losing you." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. At dinner, I made beef stew. Not because Vanessa requested it, because I decided the recipe belonged to me and William, not to the worst moment of our family's history. The pot simmered slowly on the stove. The kitchen smelled like onions, herbs, and warm broth. For a little while, I stood there alone, stirring it the way I had done hundreds of times before. Then Vanessa came into the kitchen. "Can I help?" she asked. I looked at her. She did not have a wineglass in her hand. She did not have a clever remark ready. She looked uncertain, almost like the little girl who had once worn William's apron. "You can set the table," I said. She smiled softly. "Okay." Dinner was not magically easy. There were pauses. There were moments when Vanessa seemed afraid to say the wrong thing. There were moments when I felt myself waiting for the next insult, even though none came. But when she took a bite of the stew, she put down her spoon and looked at me. "This is really good, Mom." I nodded. "Thank you." Then she added, "Dad loved this, didn't he?" "Yes," I said. "He did." Her eyes filled with tears. "I miss him." "So do I." That was all. No speech. No dramatic forgiveness. Just the truth, finally spoken without cruelty around it. I still keep boundaries. Vanessa does not have a key to my house. I do not drop everything when she calls. If she speaks disrespectfully, I end the conversation. I no longer explain myself for owning my home, cooking the food I love, or living the life William and I built. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant I stopped carrying the bitterness every day. Trust returned more slowly. It had to. Because dignity is not something you give up to prove you love someone. It is something you protect. So, love has a chance to become healthy again. One Sunday morning, nearly a year after Thanksgiving, I opened the kitchen window while a pot of stew simmered on the stove. The air outside was cool, and the maple tree in the yard was beginning to turn gold. I looked around my old kitchen. The same cabinets, the same worn floor, the same dining table where I had cried, forgiven, and finally learned to speak. Nothing about the room had become fashionable. Nothing about it needed to. It was still the place where my family had learned the difference between being invited and being entitled. And it was still my home. If Rebecca's story touched your heart, please subscribe to Rebecca's Justice Stories. Like this video, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that love should never require silence in the face of disrespect. And tell me in the comments, would you have given Vanessa a second chance? Or would Thanksgiving have been the final goodbye?